the common misconception is that in the French Revolution, that only the rich people lost their heads to the guillotine. But nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is, even ordinary plebs often lost their heads to the guillotine. Sometimes just for phrasing things wrong, using the wrong wording, using a politically incorrect phrasing things politically incorrectly in public. Does that sound familiar? Thinking of now the cancel culture. So even like, yeah, so like that, the terms left and right were so common now today, likely originated from the French Revolution that began in 1789. And we're still using that phraseology, left and right, from a political context today. So I think it's kind of important to understand the origins of that, and to understand what the French Revolution was all about. I think it came, the words, they came from just the physical, in the French Legislative Assembly, the revolutionaries were sat to the left of the Speaker of the Assembly, and the people who wanted things to basically stay the same sat to the right, and so now I think it's like it's a false choice to say, oh well, either you're with the leftists or those on the right, because I've after learning about the French Revolution, I used to identify as, even though I once identified as being a lefty, I no longer do so now that I understand what the French revolutionaries, what they were all about, and how brutal and cold they were in their actions, and seeing how also how there's a direct line when you connect the revolutionaries of the French Revolution to then on to Hegel, who was heavily influenced by the French Revolution, and then from Hegel goes straight to Marx, and from Marx to the Russian Revolution, and then the Soviet Union, the Russian, the Soviet, the Communist Party. And you look at all the cold brutality of the Soviet bloc countries, and you get to understand there's a problem there. I do not want to have. Well, I wouldn't say I don't want to have anything to do with anything about. I mean, I still believe that, sure, yes, it was wrong of the Marie and Louis to have so much wealth concentrated in such few hands, wealth and power. Yeah, yes, that was bad. I'm not saying that was good. That was very bad. And I still consider myself a progressive. I believe being a progressive is just about trying to make the world a better place. And yes, and it continues to this day. There's a extremely serious problem with a concentration of wealth into too few hands. I don't dispute that, and I don't necessarily agree either with those on who identify as politically right, of course, because they may want to have too much of a naive notion of how many things capitalism can solve. I think that's they're also sort of delusional on that weight also. Although at the same time, I do not support banning capitalism. Oftentimes those on the left, they're not clear about that. They have all this criticism of capitalism, but they don't say whether or not they want to outright ban capitalism. That as to some extent, the former Soviet bloc countries did, and Chairman Mao. But I'm against that. I'm against banning capitalism. But I didn't really intend to go on to it's a very complex subject here, but I think it's very nuanced also. So I'm neither a lefty nor a right-winger. But regardless, it's important to understand, I think, how brutal the French Revolution was in the Reign of Terror, and the leader of the French Revolution, Robespierre, how cold a human being he became, even though early on he was a progressive, he was genuinely a progressive-minded person, but became corrupted by the power that he garnered from the revolution. And so I'm just going to show a part of a History Channel documentary on the French Revolution to give you an idea of why I think it was so bad, to put it bluntly, and in how some parallels can be shown between that revolution and even up to today, in seeing the corruption of power, the power itself, what I believe is corruption within what would be considered called now the woke mob and the cancel culture. And so maybe, I don't know if you might see the same parallels that I do. So I'll just show a clip now of that documentary.
It is time for all Frenchmen to enjoy sacred equality. It is time to impose this equality by signal acts of justice upon traitors and conspirators. Make terror the order of the day.
Thus begins a new chapter in the revolution, a period of violent repression called the Terror. In a remarkable reversal, the revolutionaries suspend the new constitution and all the rights it was to guarantee. Police spies scatter throughout the country. Anyone suspected of counter-revolutionary activity is rounded up, quickly tried, and sent to the national razor.
The Reign of Terror was conceived as an emergency government. What they understood by terror was striking terror into the hearts of the enemies of the Republic, so that they would be either scared straight, as it were, or arrested and disposed of.
The slightest suspicion can send anyone to the scaffold. Politicians who say a kind word of the defunct monarchy. Anyone who uses the formal monsieur or madame instead of the new form of address, citizen. The air is fraught with paranoia. Neighbors denounce neighbors. The incessant rolling of the death carts rattles through the streets of Paris.
Execution is absolutely hanging over people's heads, in the sense that we know in Paris there are police spies, and there are quite a few police spies everywhere, standing in bread lines, listening to what the women are saying, and turning them in if they don't like what they hear. You could be turned in not just for complaining about the high price of bread, but you could be turned in supposedly even for not being enthusiastic enough about where things were going and the successes of the revolution. So just about anything that would stand out for commentary could get you into trouble.
The convention sets up a revolutionary tribunal, expediting trials and executions with ruthless efficiency. To consolidate power, they form a 12-man council and call it the Committee of Public Safety.
Ultimately, power had to be delegated to a smaller group, and that group became the Committee of Public Safety. Ultimately, it became 12 people who really ruled France as a kind of collective dictatorship.
With his masterful words and revolutionary vision, Robespierre soon emerges as the committee's fiercest guiding voice. And that voice is calling for more blood.
One of the paradoxes in Robespierre's political life is that he very early on is a passionate opponent of the death penalty. And of course, this is thrown back in his face later when he becomes an equally passionate proponent of terror and the guillotine. He never particularly responds to that except to say, well, times have changed.
No, Robespierre, it is you that has changed. This keeps happening throughout history with people, individuals and groups. They start out with this. They have developed a certain hubris, given that they, in the beginning, they have this idea. Have good intentions early on. They believe, what they're doing. They're trying to fight against corruption and fight against the power. But then once they get into power themselves, they still are under the assumption that they're going to be immune from the corrupting power of power itself, and thereby they don't respect the corrupting power of power. And without them even realizing what's happening, they themselves become corrupted. The bullied become the bullies. And I believe that is what's happening through today, where the woke mob, even though maybe originally they intended to be fighting against the bullies, they become the once bullied now become the bullies once they come into power. And so now we have this cancel culture where, well, fortunately now, instead of people's heads getting canceled like in the French Revolution, now their careers are getting canceled by the woke mob. The cancel mob are canceling people's careers because somebody in a certain line, entertainment industry or whatever, they said the wrong thing that the woke mob did not like, and so somebody's career gets canceled. And so I think that it's become a matter of, not a matter of principle. It becomes a matter of who has the power to wield this influence over people's lives. And what's happening with the current leftist woke mob is that they're thinking that they're immune from this kind of corruption of power itself, and so that they don't realize that they are becoming the bullies, and they're not realizing that they're losing sight of the very principles that got them in, that guided them in the beginning for in their goals to do the right thing, to try to make the world a better place. But now I think they're forgetting about those principles and just assuming that what they're doing is right and just without even reflecting on their own actions. And I think that's very dangerous. We've seen that over and over again throughout history. We've seen it with Robespierre changing his mind without realizing it, and it goes from going against the death penalty to cutting off people's heads, ordering people's heads get cut off without giving it a second thought. And so it's extremely dangerous, the power of power itself, the corrupting power of it. And people need to be mindful of that. How dangerous that is. Once people get into positions of power with the hubris of thinking, oh, they're immune from the power of corruption, when in fact they very much are not. They're very all too human.